Hello, Father Murr.
Good morning or good evening, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing well, Father Murr. I'm in Rome and it's 5 in the evening. No, yes, 5 in the evening. And you're in some secret location.
But it's also 5 in the evening
All right.
where I am. That's good.
And we're getting some messages already from several of our viewers. So much appreciated. Thank you. When you send nice messages, we do appreciate it. Lady Rotha, greetings from the
I
Isle of
love, Robert, I've got to tell you, personally, I love being greeted from the Isle of Man. I think
I know.
that's one of the neatest things ever.
Yeah. It seems to have some symbolic significance.
Yep.
And it's sort of halfway in between England and France. It's out in the ocean. It's got some almost mystical quality, like it's a safe spot.
Yes. Yes.
So
That's right. That's right. You hit it.
and Allison L says blessings to the both of you. So thank you, Allison. And Star Voyager Man says greetings from New Jersey. So it must be 11 in the morning there. Yeah, we appreciate these readers. Ivan Chernkovich, greetings from Zagreb, Croatia.
Beautiful.
Well, Ivan, thank you so much for joining. And if you have some special question, you can type it in and we'll try to answer it. Antonia Swift, little sheep waiting eagerly to be fed here in New Hampshire. So, Father Murr, we're on the 27th of June, 2023 at 5 in the evening in Rome. It's a hot day. I've just spent some hours in the Academy of Sciences with Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana, who's the Chancellor of the Academy, and a discussion about global economy and how it could be refashioned to help care better for the world's poor. Meanwhile, in the church, Cardinal Zuppi, who is a very nice man, he was the parish priest years ago. I was attending Santa Maria in Trastevere, and he was the parish priest there. And that's where the Sant'Egidio community was born as its headquarters. Pope Francis asked him to go to Kiev about 4 weeks ago. And he did go, and he met with Zelensky, the president. And he said, try to create some sort of context for the beginning of a peace discussion. So far, that hasn't happened, but it was just reported today that he's going tomorrow to Moscow, and will be in Moscow tomorrow and the day after. So Sant'Egidio community is famous for trying to negotiate between groups that are struggling civil war situations in places like Angola and Mozambique years ago. And they managed to somehow make very divided and angry groups come to some type of agreement. The overarching position that we all have is that everything can be lost by war, especially if it expands into terrible biochemical, gas, and nuclear weapons. So we always regard the peacemakers as blessed by God. It says it in the Sermon on the Mount. And therefore, even though it's extremely complicated and there can be sort of political concerns, economic concerns, nevertheless, the idea of having people talk rather than fight, I think is a fundamentally good one, fundamentally Christian one. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. This is civil. It's civil. It's Christian. It's really what Western civilization is about since it became Christian, is sitting down and talking and coming to to treaties and understanding, and so that people live in peace. Yes, all of that is
Yeah.
great. It's great.
Right.
Anything that brings about peace is good. It's good.
Yeah,
When done also with justice, right?
Yeah, and all of us have families. We have parents, and then many of us have brothers and sisters, and people have children and nephews and nieces. They watch them grow up, and they don't want their life to be under the shadow of a nuclear bomb or of
You
a
know,
kind
Robert,
of.
I was on another program yesterday, and the question came up about war and about Europe. Actually, the question was, why is the European church, or why are the European churches empty? Why are they being sold? Another question that goes to that is, why are they being burnt to the ground? Many of them. But I was trying to explain anyway from what I learned when I was in Rome. We had a great professor, Father Vincent Michelli.
Oh,
Great.
yes.
I love that guy. He was super. Anyway, he was very much. He did his doctoral thesis on Gabriel Marcel and existentialism, and he influenced me and a lot of other people quite well. But he presented what had happened to Europe after World War I
Yes.
and after World War II. And he started explaining, and it made sense, how people lost faith and how people became cynical because of those wars. And I was asked, well, but the United States was also in World War I and World War II, and we didn't have that degree of cynicism. But we did. The difference was, in the United States, we didn't have people dying on our front lawns. The war wasn't brought to us. It wasn't in our backyard or our front yard, right? But it was in Europe, and the
Yes.
devastation of those wars is exactly what you're talking
I
about.
did.
Avoiding with peace talks, right? This is exactly this is what we don't want to happen in different places of the world where there's conflict, is that the result be like in great part Europe was after World War I and World War II, where nihilism certainly came into being, and people doubted God, they doubted love, they doubted hope, and these are also I think a lot of times this is overlooked, especially in history books. These world wars were fought between Christian nations.
Yeah.
And it ruined people's faith. And something else that came up, I don't know why I remembered this, because I had not thought about this in decades. But recently, I remember as a boy, there was a terrible fire in Chicago, and of a Catholic school. I believe it was Guardian Angel School.
Mhm.
And many children were killed in that fire. It was a Catholic school, and some of the sisters who taught in that school were killed in that fire. They died in the fire. And I remember people when I was a boy. I think I was in first or second grade when this happened. People stopped going to mass. They stopped. A lot of people had nothing more to do with religion because they couldn't imagine a God who would permit such a thing as innocent children being killed in a fire in a Catholic school, nuns being dying in a fire in a Catholic school. It didn't make any sense to them. Therefore, I'm being long-winded here, but what I'm trying to say is, any prevention of war, of conflict, of disaster, of turmoil that can be negotiated should be. And I think that if they're sitting down to try to negotiate peace anywhere in the world, these are the peacemakers. These are the children of God. That's great. That's great to avoid disasters. right?
Yeah, you've said some beautiful things, and you've sparked my reflection now. First, you talked about Father Michelli, who was your teacher.
Did you know
And
Father Michelli?
you know, I've seen him on the internet in pictures. I know that he was a strong, powerful teacher and speaker, conservative, traditional, thoughtful. But I don't believe I ever met him.
He had a
Uh,
wicked sense of humor, Robert. He had a
hmm,
and he was marvelous, and he was very. I'm not exactly sure. But I always got the idea that he was from either New Jersey, son of a longshoreman, that kind of a thing, or
yes,
from New York, from the Bronx or something. But he would get in. He would talk to people, and they would be arguing, and finally he would get to the end of the argument. Like, hey, come on now, come on, get out of here. And it was fantastic. He was
yeah.
a wonderful man, great philosopher, great thinker, great teacher, and a great human being. Anyway,
Yeah, no.
that's
So
my commercial for
my
Brother
first
Michelli.
point, we're going to get onto these questions of world war and the ways justifying God's inscrutable will and things like that, which are profound questions which you've already brought up. But the very first thing that I'm thinking of is those teachers from that generation who had been trained back prior to the Second Vatican Council, back in the 40s and the 50s, and that ethos that they had of being in the church, being part of the beautiful church that they loved, and that was, even though with its human defects, would sometimes break our hearts and their hearts. Nevertheless, they committed their lives, and they spoke and believed and communicated the faith. And that generation is one we owe an awful lot to. And really, what we're trying to do is, in some small way, continue that. And therefore, I think our first word today is that it is continuing. There's all sorts of concerns and problems and difficulties, but we have the whole scripture, we have the whole history. We know Father Michelli, you knew him personally, you knew Father Archbishop and then later Cardinal Gagnon, you knew John Paul II. And we are all human, and we are carrying this, I've said this before, this treasure of the gospel in earthen vessels, in vessels of clay. But the gates of hell will not prevail. So I think that's our first message. Let's, with your good humor and with my very quiet perseverance, we can go forward.
We'd make a heck of a team, wouldn't we? Huh?
Well,
Actually, we do.
yeah, we're
We
the,
do. Yeah.
we're the beginning of a good team. And then you mentioned World War I and II. And what you said was that it had a psychological impact on the entire culture of Europe and on the
Yes.
individual consciences of millions. And essentially, the fact that Christians could kill each other on the front lines in France, where Germans who were Catholic or Protestant, called up by the Kaiser to defend Germany or to give honor and glory to Germany, and the French, who were Catholic or Protestant for the most part, and the British, who were Anglican or Catholic or Methodist. They were standing on lines by the millions, and in the Battle of Verdun, if I'm not mistaken, in 1916, in about 6 days, about 100,000 men each day were told, get out of the trenches and run towards the opposite line to try to take 10 or 20 yards of territory. And 500,000 men died in 6 days at Verdun. And these were people who were studying at places like Oxford and Cambridge and the Sorbonne and Tübingen and various other German universities, and their lives were snuffed out. And in the end, several million were killed. And Europe ended the war with the armistice of November 11th, 1918, and kind of shook its collective head, looked at all the arms missing, all the men blinded and their lungs destroyed by gas, and all the men who had died. And they said, what was this civilization that we had, we thought was so fine and was so prosperous, had created the beautiful life in London and in the rest of England, and in these societies where you could travel peacefully, and you already had the Titanic had already gone down in 1912, but people were traveling back and forth to America. And they thought, oh my gosh, we have a defective, very bad, very evil, very death-oriented society. And the philosophers themselves started to say, we can't really defend Christian civilization any longer. And then, because the peace treaty at Versailles was in some way vindictive and pinned every bit of the responsibility on the Germans, the war, in a sense, was able to be foreseen as being started up again, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yes.
Part two of the war.
The resentment built up, and the resentment that built up after World War I and before World War II was tremendous. Yes, that's why World War II got off to such an explosive start.
Yeah,
because it was there fermenting all those years. Yep.
So in some way, we are looking at the remote sources of some of the thinking that in the post-World War II period led step by step to the desire to open the church, overcome the divisions in the church, the desire for ecumenism, to bring the churches together, that played out in the Second Vatican Council.
I think that's a very mature observation, Robert. Yes, yeah. I never thought about that so much, but I think you hit something right on the head. I think that's very important. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because you had all of these people, especially all of the European hierarchy, who lived through that, who
Yeah.
lost loved ones, who lost. Priests and bishops were killed during those wars also, many religious. It were terrible times. And I think, yes, maybe that was in great part, I think in great part it was responsible for the enthusiasm, the hope that was present in Vatican II at the beginning. That's very good. You had philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and other existentialists who were atheists, who became popular, and cynicism was abounding. I had my grandfather, my mother's father, was in World War I and in World War II. He lied about his age to get into World War I, and he lied about his age to get into World War II, but he was in both of them. And he was respectful, never spoke about either war, never spoke, no battle stories, nothing. He was in serious battles, I know that. Never spoke about any of them. Very respectful of religion, but you wouldn't find him entering a church for love nor money. He had no time for that. And there were many people like that. Many people who saw war. It destroyed people's psyche. It destroyed people's lives. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with all of this, but I'm just putting together all of this that makes sense. Also for the hope of Vatican II in 1960, 62, 63, 64, 65. That there was so much of this anguish from the war that I think that accounted for an awful lot of the hope, for a lot of the hope of especially of the European. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can understand it almost as if we imagine we're a family, and there's been some tragedy among our fathers or grandfathers' generation, and they've maybe, I don't know, they had some terrible accident, and they were wounded in a car crash or a farm crash, and then it becomes the explanation for why there was a certain attitude in the family to to driving the car or to driving the tractor.
Yes.
So it's not so far back. It's our grandfather's generation that was born probably around the time of the First World War or even before
Yes.
it,
Yes.
and lived through the Second World War. My father was born in the 1920s, and he was trying to join the Second World War. At the end of the war, he was a seminarian in a minor seminary, and they watched the world that emerged from those wars with a desire for less insanity, for less murder, less killing.
Yes.
And they tried to create that. They created the United Nations so that there would be a kind of structure that people could work things out. And they created later the more supposedly open church. That's what they thought they would have. And this is where we have to recognize that they probably had good intentions. I think they were perhaps infiltrated by some humanist thinking, but it was partly from what you said at the beginning, that their spirits and psychology was broken by the tremendous destruction of World
Yeah,
War.
I think too, if you know people, I know people certainly who were young bishops at Vatican II. And
Yeah.
these were not bad people at all. They're not bad at all. They were good people. But they were coming from that whole history. And they wanted a different way of being. They really wanted peace on earth. Pacem terris, as John the 23rd's encyclical began.
Yeah.
They were good people. They were good people. I think things were hijacked along the way. That's the problem. But you're absolutely right. I believe they began with very good intentions. I don't believe they were evil intentions whatsoever. Something went wrong. I think I believe that truly. Something very, 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 very much went wrong. However, it didn't begin that way. It began out of a need to heal an awful lot of wounds, especially in Europe, in the world as a whole. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about all of those things put together. It's interesting.
Yeah, and so we take this First World War. The Pope at the time was Benedict the 15th, not
Yes.
our Benedict the 16th, who just died at the end of last year, but Benedict the 15th. And I've been told that Benedict the 15th's example was so important that Benedict the 16th decided to take the name in part to imitate Benedict the 15th.
Mm.
Benedict the 15th was elected just before the start of World War I in 1914.
Mm-hmm.
And he immediately started to write, don't go to war, negotiate, don't start. And there was the assassination of the Archduke, and then everyone had an interlocking set of agreements, and they all were excited, thinking, well, let's get into this war because it'll probably last 4, 8, 12 weeks. We can do some wondrous deeds of valor and then come home. And then it got locked into the terrible trench warfare, and people hardly moved for 4 straight years, more than a mile or two.
Yes.
in the fields of Flanders, and in the trenches where they were up to their knees in mud and water, and their feet were getting
blood.
blood. And they were getting mold on their feet and their toes, and their comrades were starting to cough and fall sick and fall into the water. So it was a terrible war, absolutely. And so Benedict the 15th was completely right to try to speak out against that war to keep peace.
And he did speak out against it.
Yeah, all the time.
He sent envoys all over the world negotiating for peace, and no one really listened. They just didn't listen. They went right ahead lands anyway.
So, I mean, we have, we do recognize that the central sacramental life of the church does continue even during war and before and after war, and yet the work of the church in favor of peace is a kind of distinguishing mark of the charity of the church. And for this reason, I appreciate what Benedict XVI did when he spoke of the need for Europe to make a harmony of nations. And he always wished to have us avoid the type of war that is now unfolding in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and about to, or conceivably could bring all of NATO in, and conceivably could become a third world war. And therefore, I appreciate Francis, in spite of being concerned about a number of things that he's said and done, which have led to some confusion, no doubt. I still appreciate the work he's doing on this particular matter, to send his emissary to try to create the context for peace talks.
Yes, I mean, who wouldn't agree with that? Who wouldn't agree with that? Anything that you can do for the sake of peace, and anybody who can do it from any side of the argument is welcome, I think, right?
Oh.
Yes.
And now the other thing you said was you had a relative who was devastated by the loss of his father. Is that what you told me earlier? The people who were devastated by the apparent injustice, and they.
Well, yes. When I was a boy in first or second grade, I think it was 1958. We were all in Catholic schools, and Catholicism was growing leaps and bounds. It was incredible. It was just growing in the United States, and all of a sudden, I remember the sister that we had, Sister Wilberta, announced that there had been a fire in a Catholic school in Chicago, exactly. And I believe I believe it was a Guardian Angel or Holy Angels school, and it was devastating. It stunned everyone, Robert. It stunned everyone. Because we were living in peace. We were out of the war. There were war heroes who had returned home. There were many people. I met many fathers. My father was too young for the war to have enlisted even. But many other people, many other kids that went to school with me. We were 54, 56 in one classroom. Right?
I know.
With one, it was amazing. You tell this to people, they think you're exaggerating, and all exaggeration falls short of the reality, the beauty of those years.
Yeah, I had 44 in my first grade class.
Oh, that's a small family. Yeah. We were 56. It's incredible. Anyway, and we all got an education. Anyway, but I remember the sister being. Even she was shook or shaken by that experience. It just came. This didn't make sense. Even a war would make sense. You've got nations against nations. You've got rivalry and this. But that a Catholic school in Chicago would burn, killing many students and some of the nuns who taught there. It sort of knocked the air out of people.
Yeah,
it didn't make any sense at all. A war sort of made sense, but something like that disaster didn't. And I know that it affected a lot of people's faith. I know it did.
Well, I want to go right to that point, Father Murr. I'm honest enough to say these things happen. And I'm honest enough to agree with you that these things cause people to lose their faith. It's too much.
Yes.
But I still want to explore it. It's like Thomas putting his finger in the wound. I want to say, what is the mystery of iniquity? The mysterium iniquitatis. What is the kind of mystery of innocent suffering, which we also see in the crucifixion of Christ? What is it about our world that is so unbearably sad? And how do we face it?
Wow. How long is this program?
Well,
You know, there's another question too, Robert, that's always amazed me. I'm still dealing with it. We deal with these questions all throughout life, and we come to different conclusions in the different stages of life that we're in. But also, why is it that some people are affected and lose their faith, and other people not? Other people who actually can guide people through times of crisis like that. What makes one man sink and one man swim? I don't know. The whole thing is very mysterious. It really is. But many of those, this is why when our Lord tells us, commands us not to judge. And when he's saying not to judge, what he's saying is, you are no one to judge the interior, the conscience of a man, of another human being. No one. That belongs to God and to God alone, because only God has the history of that person. Only God has the complete history of that human being. Only God can understand him. This is why, I remember meeting some people in life who are upset with the fact that the church has never named anyone in hell. You get the liberals who are very happy about that, and they come to the conclusion that no one is in hell. I'm not saying that at all. That's ridiculous. Of course, there is a hell, and that there are people in it. There are souls in it. But the point is that the church doesn't put anyone in hell, no one by name, because of the great respect for human will and human freedom that's God-given. And only God can judge that.
yeah.
We can judge actions. We can judge people's words and their actions, and all of that is fine. And as a matter of fact, it's not only fine, it's necessary. We have to come to some judgments in society, but we cannot judge the conscience of someone. We are no one to do that, right? And when you listen, some great authors have done this. None of them comes to mind right now, but I remember reading novels where all of a sudden you understand the murderer, you understand the villain. I remember one time, I know I'm sounding a little bit crazy. I'm all over the place. I remember going with a girlfriend I had at the time to see Bonnie and Clyde, the movie Bonnie and Clyde. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes,
Faye
I do.
Dunaway and Warren Beatty, I think. And we left the theater, and she thought that this was a great movie. Everyone was talking about this movie. The theater was packed. And I was bothered by it. She said, "What's the matter? What's the matter? Didn't you like it?" I said, "Yes. I mean, the acting was fine, and I loved anything that went back to the 1930s, right? It was kind of the nostalgia was in the air. I felt disturbed that I was on the side of the criminals.
Yeah.
The movie had made me sympathetic to these horrible people. They really were horrible people. I mean, these were not nice people. They killed other human beings. They robbed everything. They were horrible people. And this movie changed my perspective. And that was the first time that I remember that happening to me. Where all of a sudden a movie or a book or something changed my point of view. Now, taking that into a little bit of a much larger picture, that of God, this is what God does. This is exactly what God does. He takes into account the entire history of every human being. And only God can do that. No one can do that. Only God can do that. And we all have a history that's personal, it's private, and it's ours. Each individual has one. And we have it for a reason, so that God can understand us. Not he understands us, of course, but that God knows it. All right. And I think there's going to be a lot of forgiveness on the part of God. I hope so. Anyway, because of that history. Fulton J. Sheen, who I love tremendously, said he talked about the 3 surprises of heaven. Remember that? He said what the first surprise of heaven is that you're going to see a lot of people you didn't expect to see.
Mm.
The second surprise is that you're not going to see some people you did expect to see. And the greatest and third surprise is that you yourself are going to be there. Right? Well,
Yeah.
I think this is why we never limit God. We never limit God in his mercy. We just don't.
Yeah.
It's totally unfair. Where am I going with all this? I'm sort of on a tangent here, but
you're on a good tangent. We're trying to get a grasp of the whole situation that we're in as people who are alive in the real world with real suffering. And Edward W. has written something nice in the chat board. He wrote, "Suffering all is the result of original sin. Also, there must be something mysterious about suffering. Jesus used it to redeem the world. He could have done anything to bring redemption to the world." Profound mystery, something really that surpasses the capacity of the mind. I'm reminded of 2 things. In the liturgy, we always begin, "Lord, have mercy." They do it in the Byzantine liturgy when they say, I know in the Russian, Gospodin Palmilnu, Lord have mercy. This is a Christian appeal to God and to the Lord Jesus to be merciful to us as very unworthy of being in his presence and of having committed many acts of selfishness, many acts of really pride and anger and other sins against our brothers and sisters. And we ask for mercy. So we also know that the redemption of the world redeems the effects of the sins. And the price was so extremely high that it was unpayable by human beings. It required divinity to pay that price.
Yes, only divinity could pay that price.
But we now know that the price has been paid, and it was really of an infinite sorrow. And that's why we talk of Our Lady Mary as being a sword passing through her heart, because before the resurrection, there was the passion, the crucifixion, and the wounds of Christ, and almost enough to bring you infinite sorrow. And that is the type of infinite sorrow that those parents and neighbors felt when that school burned down. And that's what we feel when we see a child maybe shot in a school or killed in an accident.
Yes.
But excuse me for 1 second. I've got to answer the door. You can
All right.
reflect.
I can reflect while you answer the door. All right. What shall we reflect about or on? I know something that I'm going to tell Robert, bring to his attention as soon as he returns. The relationship between passion, which is suffering. Okay, I'm talking to the audience. I'm having who is the author, Robert, during the 20s and 30s? Eugene O'Neill. He used to have those asides, right, with the audience.
Yes.
I was having a theatrical aside with the audience. What you were talking about, and I don't want this to escape us, is that great mystery that involves passio, suffering with passion, with passionate love. Suffering is part of love. Anyone who has never, a person who has never loved really doesn't understand suffering. To understand love is to understand suffering. To be separated from the person you love is a suffering. Oh my goodness! I'm remembering when I was a young man. I was so in love one time, a few times anyway. That your heart, you all of a sudden discover that your heart really truly is your center, because it hurts. It hurts from love. It's amazing. It is amazing. So we've got this passion, the passion of Christ, and I love that the word passion is used for the suffering, and passion is used for passionate love. There's a mystery between the two. There's a relationship between the two. And this is why I have a hard time believing people today, a lot of young people today, who have never suffered, who have never experienced anything of war, of disaster, of not having something, not having everything they wanted on a silver plate. They don't understand anything of suffering, and I am convinced they understand even less of love. And I mean that.
Father Murr, you've now touched, we're bringing a number of points together here, which are very important. And compassio, passio comes from patior, I suffer. Compassion, I suffer with. But compassion means I love. I have compassion on someone.
Yes.
But that also means literally I suffer with that person.
But isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful, Robert? When you say I love you includes I suffer with you.
Exactly.
This is beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful.
Well, no, this is the key to being a person. And
it's also the key to being Christian.
Absolutely.
Very much so, right?
And I want to bring also in Job. Now, why do I want to bring Job in? Because...
Oh, why not?
Well, he suffered. He suffered.
Yes.
And his friend said, why don't you denounce God? Because obviously it's unjust. You're not suffering for a good reason. You've been a good person. And you or I could say, why did this happen to me? Even if you stub your toe, say, say, why?
I didn't deserve that. Why did that happen?
Why did this happen to me?
Yeah.
But then Job describes this mystical experience. He sees God, and God spoke to him out of the whirlwind. And he said, where were you before I laid the foundations of the world? And Job says, really, oh my goodness, I am nothing. This is awesome. This is the creator of the universe, everything with depth and color and density and energy and suns and moon and stars. And I'm a man complaining. He said, now, before I had heard of you with the hearing of the ear, now my eye sees you, and I repent in dust and ashes. Because he could not blame God, because it's a different level of being. We're contingent beings, and God is uncontingent being.
Yes.
And suffering is part of being a person. If you said that they lost their faith because they couldn't understand how these innocent children had died. Then you said another thing. You said children and young people and other people today are so affluent. They never suffer. They have everything they want. They'll lose their faith for that reason.
Yes.
And I think that reason in some ways is turned out to be more lethal than the first. Because in our condition as mortals, we recognize that our being is going to be taken away, and our hope in the resurrection, the story of the gospel, is the only hope we have that surpasses time. And therefore, we are in a river of of falling short of the longing we have for union and being with the eternal God, eternal happiness. And therefore, we're in an imperfect, in a fallen world that requires redemption. So this is our condition. And the mystery is that when you suffer, and if you can somehow transform that suffering into something you share with Christ in the redemption of the world, which St. Paul says we should do. He says, unite your sufferings with the sufferings of Christ to make up that which is lacking. One of the most mysterious.
Isn't that a fantastic line? I love that line. What is lacking in the sufferings of Christ? Wow. What is lacking in the passion of Christ in yourself? Yes.
But I am absolutely persuaded that you excavate the interior of your personality, whether you be Charles or I am Robert, or we have listening Ivan or Edward or someone, that person gets deeper and more rich if that person embraces the suffering.
Absolutely. And not just embraces it, but the first step is certainly to embrace it. You're absolutely correct. But also to incorporate it, to actually incorporate it, to let it be part of your experience, and not a negative part, a necessary part. It's necessary. It's not really negative. Of course, anything that's suffering, we don't like. A toothache, we don't like. We run from suffering. But when it comes and we can't avoid it, ultimately, and this may take years. In some cases, it has taken years, and I know that from other people. I know it from myself too. But finally, you embrace it. You accept it. You accept it. It's part of you, and then you've given it meaning. And the moment you give that meaning, Robert.
Yes.
It has sense. It has sense. It belongs. You understand it,
okay.
And you go with it.
Yeah.
Let me just say something too before we go on. You made a point of Job, and there were three friends, right? Three friends who at the end went to convince him. Three men who good businessmen. They understood everything, so they went to Job and they told him why he had failed. They gave him all the reasons, and they came to the conclusion that he should negate God. He should deny God. This is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And then the wonderful questions that God makes, that God asks Job. Where were you when I created the world? When I put the world into being? Where were you? Who counseled me if you weren't there? How did all of this get done without you, Job? Right?
Yeah.
And again, Fulton J. Sheen. I remember reading this years ago, and I was impacted by his answer. He said, "And Job." Listen to this. He said, "Job was more content with the questions of God than with the answers of men."
Right. Well,
and it's beautiful. What the answers of men are they're pragmatic, boom, cold, that's it.
okay.
The questions of God are infinite.
Yeah,
they're infinite.
Okay. So we're getting close to what I wanted to reach in this program. We're going to artificial intelligence now. We're going to supercomputers that can grind up the Encyclopedia Britannica in about half a second. Therefore, they're very powerful. However, God is infinitely beyond. And they're trying to sell us this as the thing that will give us the contentment and the joy and the affluence and prosperity of the highest form that we can have in human life. And I'm coming back with this other longing for the infinite God, which includes embracing suffering. And I'm saying we're on another level from what's being proposed by the secular world, even if it blows our mind with how powerful and effective and efficient it is. Because the questions of God are greater than the answers of men, which is what
There you
you
go.
just said.
Yes.
And we long for God because he's holy. And the computer, no matter how many millions and trillions of functions and calculations it makes, will not be a holy person, an infinite holy God, who we were made to long for, to adore, and to be in communion with. And this is why the message the church carries is the greatest possible treasure, even though it's carried in these poor, fallible, and
Yes.
mortal human vessels of clay.
The last time, our last program, I think it was with you on this program, I brought up artificial birth control. Do you remember that? I think it was
Yes.
this program. All right. And I said, and we're talking about artificial intelligence. And immediately it connected with artificial birth control in my mind. Artificial was the connecting word. Artificial.
Mm.
I said this then. The artificial birth control, I was quite alive when this happened, when it was brand new it was coming out. I mean, everyone was waiting for the Pope to approve it, artificial birth control. It was going to be the solution, Robert, to everything. You weren't going to have children you didn't want to have. You could control the number of children, this, that, and the other. And you know what, Robert? Listen to this. And I knew it was a lie when I heard this when I was 16 years old, sitting in religion class with the Christian Brothers. It was brought up as a positive to birth control. It would eliminate all abortions.
Yeah.
Yeah? It promised to eliminate all abortions. If you don't agree with artificial birth control, you must be in favor of abortion. That was actually the reasoning presented. My point here is this. Artificial birth control did not fulfill any promise. It's artificial. It is artificial, right? Artificial intelligence is, I think, doomed to the same destiny. It is not going to provide, it's not going to give the answers it promises. It's not going to fulfill them because it is artificial. It is not real, right? And intelligence, if intelligence doesn't come from interlegere intelligence, to read from the inside is the meaning of intelligence. If it's not from here, if it's from outside from a machine, that's not intelligence. That's facts. That's figures. That's computer, right?
Okay.
Anyway.
You're leading me to another reflection, which is drawn from your thought. There's a passage which speaks of our faith as refining us like gold is refined.
Seven times in the furnace, right?
Yeah. And therefore, what is supposed to be going on in this world? If the most precious thing is a holy soul, and if sacrifice, suffering, love creates that holy soul, if adoration, veneration, reverence, and if consumption and self-indulgence diminishes that soul, sort of contracts that soul, and leaves us with a bunch of hollow men or hollow souls, it doesn't really give us much joy to think our society is producing a gross national product that's bigger and bigger when the people are taking more and more depressant drugs. They're more and more nervous. They're more and more closed in on themselves. They're more and more unable to bear suffering. They're more and more unable to love and to be in communion. Therefore, what I'm saying is what the church has always taught, what the formation of Christian souls has always taught, what is still trying to teach, is that a piece of gold has to be produced, and it's got to be burnt in the fire of suffering, sacrifice, but that what happens as a result is it is so dense and heavy that it is precious. And it's like an old grandmother who spent a lifetime caring for her family, and you're in her presence, and there's an aura around her of profound human goodness, not perfection, but someone who has been purified. And you can find that between two brothers who have done everything they can to help their brother, or two sisters, or a husband and a wife. These are the productions in human history that God wished to bring forth. And he was willing to risk sin and the fall to give freedom so that we could love and sacrifice and somehow purify and become something that gives glory to God. Man fully alive is the glory of God. But the life of man,
Man fully alive is the glory of God. Yes. Yes.
but the life of man is the vision of God. We can't be fully alive unless we turn to what is eternal and infinite and holy. And Jesus tells us this is our true home. Until we start on the pilgrimage toward that, we are making a mistake about what our destiny is.
That's right.
I'm passionate about this because anything else leads to a dead end.
That's right. That's right. No, you're absolutely correct. As anything and everything else leads to a dead end. Right? This is why only God can take care of that yearning and that longing. Only. What the famous words of Saint Augustine? My soul is restless until it rests in thee, O Lord. Right? That's exactly it. What we you know what, Robert? What we have to really inculcate in Catholic education is that every human love has as an ultimate goal union with God.
Yes.
It's what it's about. Every human love. It is not an end and a goal in itself. And this is the mistake that people are making. It's not an end in itself. When your husband or your wife dies, when your child dies, when you die, that's it? No, that's not it. That's not it at all. There's a continuation, and it only continues in God, and it only can continue in God.
Father Murr, you are now preaching the word, and this is why our little conversation is important. Even though we don't give the most up-to-date news, we don't give the stock reports, and we may not give the political news. Nevertheless, what we're talking about is the essential, most important thing.
Can you imagine God for one split second being concerned about the stock report?
Well,
distractions. These are so many distractions we have in life from what really is important. Right?
Well, I would like you to almost give a prayerful meditation now for those listening or those who may watch about how the meaning of our lives and really the suffering we experience can be redemptive. And let's pray also for all souls who are scandalized by the mystery of iniquity, by children who are innocent and die like in that fire. And just meditate for a moment and pray for everyone that they could grow in faith, hope, and love.
One last thing, Robert. We're talking always in the last few decades anyway, about the lack of respect and understanding and appreciation of the Holy Eucharist, of our Lord in the Eucharist. There's something that most of us miss in the Eucharist. I try to remember it every time I'm offering the bread and the wine at Mass. I remember, even for a fleeting second, that the bread is a combination of crushed grain. All of those grains of wheat were crushed by a millstone, a tremendously heavy millstone. Each one of them died to its former state. They were crushed, milled. The grapes, all of those individual grapes, like the individual wheat, all of the individual grapes were crushed to make the wine. They died, in other words, both the wheat and the grapes died to their original form to become something nobler. And they did this through suffering, through this crushing, through this the immolation, the painful letting go of one way of being to become something nobler. This is what the Eucharist is. This is the bread and wine that we're offering, which is in turn, what's going to happen to it? It's going to be transformed again into the body and blood of Christ. But my whole point is that these materials that are used for the body and blood of Christ are put together by individuals suffering together that become a new form. And then it is elevated into Christ himself. This is what suffering is all about. It's dying to one form and being born to a nobler one. Ultimately, it's being born to God. Into God. This is what this progression is all about. And you know, it's not easy. As a matter of fact, it's almost impossible at the moment when we're facing suffering to embrace it. But with time, sometimes we consider time an enemy because we're getting old and we get wrinkled and we get weaker. And time is not an enemy. Time is a great friend. It gives us that time necessary to think and to come to conclusions. What I want to do is invite people to look at their own sufferings in life. And if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't know what suffering is, don't you worry. Don't you worry. It'll come soon enough. You'll understand it sooner or later in life. Don't run away from it. Don't run away from it. It is part of your salvation. Embrace it ultimately. That's what I would say.
All right. We have Isabel saying, thank you for that beautiful meditation, Father Murr. Thank you both for sharing your conversations. And we have Star Voyager Man. I don't really know if that's his real name but he's saying, what is the meaning of life? Know God, love God, serve God, so that we can live forever with God. And
that's it. That's it. When I had Catholic schools in New York, I said to all of the students, nobody is graduating until he can answer that question. Why were you created? To know, love, and serve God in this life and be happy with him ultimately.
Yeah, so this is also what we can say to the formulators of the supercomputer intelligence, which they are proposing as a new God. We'll say, no, he's not personal. He's not holy. I don't know him. I don't have a personal relationship. And this is why, despite the enormous power, the enormous effectiveness and efficiency that we all see developing with the supercomputers that we all are using even to have this program. Nevertheless, the Holy Spirit of God is the life-giving spirit. It's the person-shaping spirit, and it's the spirit that brings us to true intimacy, true love, and satisfies all the longings of our soul. That's sort of my position and my belief, which I struggle to.
You know, Robert, one thing that you've mentioned many times, and I think should be mentioned again. This is called and I can't emphasize the word enough, artificial intelligence. Right? I think it's one of the first times that modern man has called something honestly what it is. Artificial. Fulton Sheen said too that there was only one recorded time in Scripture that the devil told the truth. He said when he met with Christ in the temptations in the desert and said, "Bow down and adore me, and I'll give you any of the governments of this world. They're mine. They're mine to give." And Sheen said it was the only time the devil spoke the truth. Right? Well, this also when they're calling this, I was flabbergasted that they actually call it artificial intelligence. I think that's brilliant because they're being honest this is a rarity for modern man to be so honest in calling it artificial, and it is.
Well, so we've talked about the important and essential questions. I think we also have to discuss whether we're going to come to visit you and have you cook for us for several days in a kind of retreat or staycation or something. And people should write to us and say they want to come with me to visit Father Murr, wherever he may be. And I'm going to tell people that it's a wonderful place.
It is.
And it'll be a time of spiritual renewal. And people can join us if they write to us and sign up. And we'll try to do it perhaps in the wintertime. What do you think?
I think it's great. Just give me a number, Robert, because, cooking for a group requires a little planning.
All right.
The chickens will be unhappy. The chickens are the first to go when we have visitors. You hear them squawking because they're on the block.
Okay. I don't want to go into all those details, but yeah. Father, you also have written some beautiful books. People can look at those books. Can you tell us the names and how they can find them?
Yes. I mean, there's Murder in the 33rd Degree, The Godmother, which I think are great books. I loved writing them, and I love their content. There's also a book of personal stories in my life. It's called Memoirs of an Unwed Father. Right? There's stories, especially about my time in Mexico, my time in New York, in San Francisco, in Rome, in Salzburg. They're vignettes, but a lot of them are very humorous. Some of them are a little bit touching. And also, there's a book that is just coming out now in Spanish and in Arabic called The Syrian. It is about Archbishop Capucci.
Yes.
You remember Capucci? Famous man, and it's a touching story, and it's a deep story about forgiveness and acceptance and the real Christian message that takes place in his life, and I witnessed it, and it was moving. So there are those books. If you want to read something like that, it would be good.
Okay. Someone said, I assume Father Murr is in the USA. Well,
you know what they say about assume.
What do they say, Father?
Well, assume is ASSUME. And the thing is, to assume is to make an ass out of you and me. So don't assume. Actually, you would assume incorrectly.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. We do have some other pilgrimages that we take. If people would like to join us, they're on our website. I think we have an advertisement for one. Give the website. On radio, I mentioned Croatian translation. Okay, Ivan asked, question for Father Murr, Murder in the 33rd Degree. On radio, he mentioned it will be in Croatian translation.
I believe it already is in Croatian. It's in Croatian, Hungarian, Polish. They're translating it now in French. It's in Spanish, Italian. The Italian version is coming out, I think, next month. It'll hit the stands in Rome. I'd give anything. I'd get anything to be a fly on the wall there when it comes out.
Thank you, Julie Walters. She writes, wonderful conversation. Thank you both. If you want to find out about our pilgrimages, we have a website, InsideTheVatican.com. And it's the actual name of the website is InsideTheVaticanPilgrimages.com for the pilgrimages. And Jessica, do we have a ad to show about one of the pilgrimages?
Say goodbye to everyone.
I guess we don't have that. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us, and we very much appreciate all of you. We've been learning as we've done these programs, and we're trying to go more deeply, and I think we're understanding better because as we speak, we also learn. And thank you, Father Murr. I wish you good health, and I look forward.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, and thank the audience, our listening audience, for putting up with my meanderings. Thank you very much.
I think people are enjoying it, Father. So grazie mille, and thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Grazie.
Join us this September on an unforgettable pilgrimage to Lebanon, the land where Christ walked. This is a pilgrimage you won't want to miss. We'll taste world-renowned Lebanese cuisine, drift through underground grottos, and explore the monasteries high above in the mountains and in the deepest valleys on our way to an encounter with the miracle worker Saint Charbel in the land where Christ walked. Join us this fall, September 16th